So, what is slowing you down? The journey of creating music can be full of obstacles, but it's important to acknowledge and face them head on. Whether you're an experienced producer or just starting out, on today's episode, we'd like to explore the various hurdles in music production and take a look at some creative solutions to conquer them. Many of the problems that producers have to overcome are both mental and technical. And in today's episode, we'd like to explore some essential tips for music producers who are struggling out there, whether it be with finishing your tracks, creative block, or just mixing and mastering. We're going to get into it today. So, welcome to episode 57 of the Make Music Income podcast. I'm here with my bud Eric Copeland of MakeMusicIncome.com, and I am Stevie B from ProductionMusicAcademy.com. And yeah, how's it going, man? How's your week been?
It's going good. I have just finished a couple different masterminds this week, which went really well. In the composing mastermind, we talked this week about different kinds of, in the composing mastermind, we talked about the most obtuse song that you've ever written. We tried to find really artsy, non-commercial use songs, and so that was fun to hear what everybody was doing. And then in the Make Music Income Mastermind, we talked about just a lot of music. Everybody's into something different, like business-wise, and so we talked a lot about starting websites and building your website as a producer, and some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, kind of, but more so tips for different kinds of music income, which is obviously what we focus on in there. But we still listen to music, and we had a great time doing that today. So both are international things. We've got people all around the globe in these things. So it's very cool to have these things going on. I am still in the midst of delivering both. I'm in the midst of delivering to one library this new album of percussion music, and so that is we're just trying to dot all the T's. This is the first time working with this library, so they have different rules than other libraries I've been part of. So, just getting those initial papers. And once you've done an album with them, you don't have to go through the whole writer's thing. So, because I know it might seem weird, but they want to find out how to pay you, Steve. And so little things like, what is your PRO and what is your IPI number? Just little things that you might want to give them in case someone wants to pay for your music. So
Yeah.
getting all that together, and I have two different co-writers in Nashville that were part of several of the tracks, two drummers, and so they're trying to get their information in, which is not easy because session players are used to doing one thing, showing up and getting paid for a gig. And so the thought of down the road income is a little foreign to them. They're not used to it because it's not something that they've normally done. They've normally done upfront income, where they get paid the day of for gigs.
Right.
So having to file all these papers are a little foreign to them, and convincing them to do this, is a trick. But anyway, we're going down that road. And then 2 days ago, my country album came out on my other library, and so hopefully some of those songs will start matriculating into catalogs and getting on TV shows and things like that. And so hopeful for that. Let's see what else has been going on. Jumping into Logic this week and teaching. I'm also teaching somebody how to use GarageBand, which is almost exactly like teaching Logic. If you're on a PC, on a Mac book or a Mac Mini or something, and you're dealing with GarageBand, it looks exactly like Logic. It's
pretty much
almost no different. It uses the same sounds, and there's just it uses the same key commands. It's almost exactly the same.
Logic Light. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And so I'm kind of telling everybody about that. I think I'm going to do a video on it soon on one of my channels, just talking about, hey, if you have a Mac and you don't have Logic, you have Logic, and so
and you can
so
record
powerful.
in it, right? Like you can hook it up to a microphone and do,
Sure.
and yeah, you can do a lot of the basic functions that you can.
Same thing, three channels: an audio channel, a MIDI channel, or an instrument channel, or a drummer track, and it works exactly the same. Exactly, because I teach Logic. I'm teaching it this week at school, and then I've taught GarageBand is the exact same thing. All the key commands are the same.
Right.
Loops are still there. Instruments are still there. So it's very similar.
Yeah.
So doing that, and also trying to push myself into some other areas of composition. I have a weekend where I'm going to have some time here at the house to really work on some stuff. So I'm going to really be pushing into some different territories to try to finish up some songs, but also to write and start some new compositions, maybe from some different directions rather than the normal directions. I'm in a very a need for artistic mode right now rather than write for job mode. And so that's probably where I'm going to be focusing a little bit as a composer, really focusing a little bit more on writing from my gut and my heart rather than writing to any kind of a brief. Even though I do have briefs I'm writing to as well. But I need that balance of artistical. I don't even know how to say it.
Is that a word?
Artistry. I need that artistic, creative slant in it. And so that means I got to come at it from a different direction, not necessarily just, writing to the brief and writing 4 bars and 8 bars and 4 bars and 8 bars. So
yeah.
Anyway, that's what I'll be doing. And that's what's going on with me. How about you? What's your week been like?
Not a whole lot to talk about. My week was it's been good so far. So since I last talked to you, my first release went live on Spotify. It was called Endless Ocean. It was a track I did with my friend David Fua from France, great keyboardist. That's going to kick off a whole year of releasing music on Spotify. I'm really excited. Next one will be going live this following week. Every Friday or Thursday or Friday. I haven't really figured that out yet. Spotify continues to, the numbers are good. Monthly listeners are still consistent, above, 13,000, I think right now, monthly listeners, which is awesome. And otherwise, just kind of finishing up work for Artlist Originals, trying to work on some motion array material. And then what really consumed me the last, 3 or 4 days basically was filming the second segment of my trailer music trilogy course. Part 1 is live in the Academy now. Part 1 is basically orchestral trailers, and then part 2 is all hybrid trailers. So a lot of effects and synths and stuff like that. And I did a little YouTube video, which I put out last Wednesday. Kind of just doing like a very light version, a quick walkthrough of that track. And basically that took up a lot of my time. I mean, I wanted to be able to kind of film the course over the span of like 2 days. And now I have a lot of videos to edit. So that's the next thing on my to-do list. I'm finally starting on the Cubase content creation stuff. I guess that kind of leads me into, the topic of discussion today, because the very first point I wanted to make about, in terms of like production tips, things, getting obstacles out of your way, is mastering your DAW. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot to say about this too, because this is, something that you teach your students at school. But I really think that, this is obvious, but I think I really think you got to make the most of your time by getting super familiar with your DAW, whether it's Logic, Cubase, or whatever. Being just knowledgeable about its basic functions will really, really allow you to work more efficiently and with increased confidence as well. And I think that to avoid, losing your creative ideas, I think what's really worked for me is just to take a few minutes each session, each time you sit down to work, to learn something new about your DAW's workflow. Now, maybe you've totally mastered it, which is awesome, but there's probably a few things that you could just research every time you sit down to write a track. There's like, for me at least, there's always something that's like, I wish there was some kind of shortcut, and then I'll just take like 5 minutes to try to figure that one out.
And there is.
Yeah. These kinds of things, it could range from like, just searching for key commands to delving into the comping process, for example. I think the goal is just to continuously build your skills And, first thing I did when I learned Cubase from the ground up is just like, first thing I did was just figure out all the key commands, write them all down, and start training my muscle memory. And that was just like a big obstacle out of my way. But I know that, you go through this with your students. It's basically probably the first thing you teach them, right?
Yeah. And, I continually find things ways to master Logic. Logic mainly is the one I use. I teach both Logic and Pro Tools, but Pro Tools is all about recording shortcuts and quick keys and things like that.
Yeah.
And you have to know all of these things. It's actually a little bit more based in quick keys than Logic is. Logic, you're pretty much all working on the same screen. You just bring different things up. It's all in one place. But Pro Tools, you're going back and forth between your edit and mix screen. You need to know all the quick keys because the cursor doesn't work the same in Pro Tools as it does in Logic. You have to know how to break things and join things and all that kind of stuff. And so there is a ton of quick keys, and they range from all the command keys, the option key, the control key, the shift key. I mean, you're using sometimes 2 and 3 keys for one thing. I think there's 3. You have to press command, option, and control, and click on something to get, to automate an effect parameter. You have to click. There's a certain way you have to do all these things. But all of these are ways that people get jobs as engineers, that people get jobs working for somebody. They walk in and they are a master, probably better than the producer they're working for in the quick keys. They're faster and as I tell them, they're quiet. They don't talk. They don't look at their phone ever. And they sit there at the board and the engineer says, okay, I need to do this. I need to do this. Or the producer like me who would hire someone. Before I taught Pro Tools, I didn't know it like all the quick keys like I do now after teaching it. And I would hire someone who was great at Pro Tools. And that was usually somebody the studio brought in. And they had a job because they were fast and because they were knowledgeable about how quickly to do everything inside of Pro Tools. But even in Logic, I have found, just by teaching it, all these different commands I didn't know about, and the way the marquee tool works, and all that kind of stuff that speeds up your workflow. And so mastering your DAW is not only important for jobs, if you want to go out and get them, but it's important for your workflow at home yourself, and mastering all the things it can do. And I'm sure there's a million things on Logic that I don't know it does, and I keep finding them out all the time.
Same. Same
so
here.
I don't think I think that's an endless process.
It is an endless process, and I think I don't know if Logic works the same way, but like Cubase, like the macros capabilities they're really, really intense. Like you can program Cubase to do hilarious like tasks for you. Like you can program it to like arrange a loop for you and everything. It's really quite amazing. Like I haven't gone that deep in it yet, but knowing your quick commands is fundamental, like number one. But I hate bringing up menus and stuff, so I really try to find program key commands to make that process fast, so I don't have to move my mouse around all the time.
And there usually is almost every single thing that you're doing in Logic or Pro Tools or whatever, there is a quick command that you could have got there faster than going up to the menu, trying to figure out where it is and find it and click on it. And by that time, you could have clicked the command key and been moving on to the next thing and listening and all that.
The idea is really just kind of getting things out of the way of the creative process, because ideas pop up really quickly, and you don't want anything to stand in the way of that idea getting put down as quick as possible. At least that's my experience with it. Anything that kind of distracts from the ideas putting down process is just a real hindrance to me getting work done. So understanding your DAW, fundamental, and I really think it's what's worked for me is just kind of taking 5-10 minutes each time. I have, not every single time, but often when I'm sitting down to write a track, something will pop in my head. I wonder if there's a way to do this better, and then I'll just Google it and I'll try to implement that into my workflow. So moving on, I think number 2 tip that I would have is take regular breaks. I don't know if you do this. I know I talk to people who just tell me they do like monstrous like 6 to 8 hour sessions where they don't move, and I'm just like, I just cannot work that way.
No.
And I think I used to, like, when I especially when I was younger, and I don't know, I guess as like, you know, as I get a bit older, my body just needs to move around a little bit. Otherwise I get all like, it actually feels painful to just sit in one place for too long. But I really think that breaks are crucial to give your ears a rest during long sessions. And it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. You know, ear fatigue can really, really impede your ability to make critical decisions, such as, you know, mixing or audio editing. To prevent this, I think that you know, it's really great to break up your sessions with short breaks. You know, so just step
or
away.
not short breaks.
Or long breaks. Yeah, totally. Depends on what your definition of short or long is, I suppose. But yeah, you know, step away from the speakers once in a while and recharge your ears. You know, headphones. I work with headphones constantly, so they're known to cause this fatigue probably a little bit quicker. So yeah, take extra care when you're using headphones for extended periods. But I really think, and again with volume, I think an important rule to remember is just to keep the volume reasonable. Monitoring at high volume is something I used to do all the time. I've probably taken a few notches off my hearing capabilities long term, and it's so tempting to crank the volume when I'm working on a session, something, especially if I'm feeling inspired and like I'm really liking it. I'll just like I feel the urge to turn the volume up, but I've resisted that lately, and I'm just like, I found I'm able to work much longer periods with the volume at a reasonable level. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I go take snack breaks. What do you do? What's your process?
I take day-long breaks, week-long breaks. Right. I find that I work on so much music that when I get to the end of what I feel like I want to do on it that day, I just save and stop. And I come back to it, especially if it's something, and I know people know what I'm talking about. When you've started something, you've gone down the road with it, and you're like, I'm just not sure about this. You know, you're not quite sure this is going to work. Now, someone asked me, how often do you start something and not finish it? I'm like, almost never, because I don't have time to be starting a bunch of stuff that I'm not going to finish. You know, I have to start and finish. If I'm not going to finish, then that'll be apparent after the first 15 to 20 minutes or maybe half an hour. And I'll be like, and I'll listen back and go, okay. And this is where I take my first break. I go, I gotta come back to this later on and listen, because after this first half hour of playing with this, I'm not so sure it's that great. And so I do a lot of putting ideas on the table and then coming back to them later and saying, all right, now here, let's go back to this song and see if it's something. And then if you listen to it, you're like, hey, that's not bad. And I can take it from here and move on. And then I'll take it to the next level. And usually at that point, I'll get close to finishing it. But then, even then, I'll go, okay, you know, especially if there's no brief. If there's no brief or reason for it, and you don't have to turn it in. If you have to turn it in, it's a whole different workflow thought. But I'm just talking about songs that I'm interested in making, and I make because I hear it and I feel it. But sometimes I have to just take a break, and sometimes that break could last days, weeks.
Right.
Again, because I create a lot of stuff, so I'm always got a ton of stuff in the hopper that is in different completion cycles. But I just, especially stuff that's not for a brief, that I don't have to get it done today, then I will give myself space. I mean, let that song breathe and see if you like it. If I'm on a deadline for a brief, well, then I'll just work as much as I have to. But yeah, dude, I have to get out every half an hour on the hour and just get outside for a minute.
Totally.
And just not listen to that for a minute. Sometimes it's even better to save it, go work on something else that's different, and let my ears rest from that song, and then come back fresh to that other song and not remembering how it went, and go, oh, okay. And because your brain and your ears hear it differently when you come back after listening to something else. So I especially do that when I master.
I like that. I think you bring up something interesting too, which is the idea of like working on like, I mean, I don't know. I would assume that probably most producers have like several different things they're working on at the same time. I don't know if that's the case, but like I definitely work that way as well. And I think that that's maybe another way to sort of break up the process. Like, I'll spend like 2 or 3 hours in a day just coming up with ideas sometimes. Like I'll plant 3 seeds, and just get a basic loop down or something really,
Yep.
just an idea down, and then I'll just press pause on it, come back to it the next day, and then take those 3 tracks and listen to them again, process it differently because I've given myself a little bit of a break, and then I can arrange all of them, put it away
Yep.
again, come back the next day, and then do a mix on all 3. Like that's another interesting way of breaking up the process. But certainly, I don't know if I've ever really had much success just sitting down for like an extended period of time and working on a track from start to finish.
I almost never do that.
Yeah.
Almost never.
Yeah.
Unless it's like a solo piano piece or something, really, really light production.
Right.
And solo piano, I will do that. I'll sit down when I'm ready to play it because I will have arranged it already. I'll have messed with it and know the arrangement I want to do. It's just a matter at that point of sitting down and playing it through. And I know friends of ours like Dan Barracuda, who's just working on like 2 guitar type things that he sits down, does those, and knocks them right out. And I do the same with piano. When I'm going to sit down and actually record it and then piece it together, I'll do that all in one sitting. But if it's a production of multiple tracks, I cannot do all that, at the same time, in the same sitting, for sure. Never, almost never.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I would have to be up against a wall for a brief that has to be done by the end of the day to do something like that.
Yeah,
and even that I'm going to take breaks.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, even that. I've sat down and done like 75-80% of the track. Sometimes when it's like a fairly light production, but never 100%. And I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've thought that I finished a track and then I like come back to it the next day and thought to myself, I'm really glad that I didn't send that one out.
Yeah.
So
a lot of times if students get to the end of the night and I know that they're going to come in early the next day, a lot of them come in before class starts. I'm like, why don't you just save and come back in and give it a final fresh ear listen tomorrow? You've been under the phones for 2, 3, 4 hours, that. And even that, I literally make them take a break every half hour.
Right.
Every hour. They get a 10-minute break or lunch, and so I say, let's take a break because you need to take the phones off and go walk outside in the halls at the very least, or go walk outside for a minute and rest your ears. And a lot of them have never done this kind of work before, so it's very odd for you to tell them quit doing music because they're like, hey, I'm here to do music. I'm like, yes, but your ears need to remain fresh, and you can't keep them fresh by just headphones for 4 hours. You can't do that. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, moving on. The next point I want to talk about is focusing on completion, and I think that a lot of people listening will probably be able to resonate with this because it's a very common problem, and many producers face this frustration of not being able to finish a track. This is a discussion that came up in the academy just the other day. And it could be for a lot of different reasons. If you're the kind of person that has plenty of ideas kicking around, but few complete songs, you'll probably be resonating with this discussion. I think there's no easy solution to this. I think to overcome it, I think you have to really set your sights on the goal of completion, and orient your process around the big picture. Try to. Also, I would suggest maybe trying to set a goal of completing without worrying about the quality of the result. And this is something that helped with me. I think it's a matter of managing your expectations to some degree. I really used to have a problem with this. Like I would just come up with these half-baked ideas and I wouldn't know what to do with them. The thing that really changed the game for me was using reference tracks and creating an arrangement structure for the idea, and then kind of plugging ideas into the arrangement. That's something that really helped for me. And these days, like a lot of my royalty-free tracks are basically based on a loop, like an 8-bar loop. Often, I'll focus on the loop first, and then just use the loop to arrange the track, and then decide, very early on in the process what the intro is going to look like, where it's going, how long it's going to be, where's the breakdown, where's the second A section, where's the outro, is there an outro? Mark those things down first, get it out of the way mentally, and then start plugging in details in like transitions and stuff from one section to the other. And that, once I started implementing that in my process, it really made the finishing the tracks issue go away. And now I always finish my tracks all the time. They're not always, I don't finish every track thinking like that was amazing. There's probably, maybe 30% of my tracks I finish them, I'm like, that one's going to do well, or I feel really, really good about that. But I think it's just a matter of discipline, just to get it finished in the first place. It's not always going to be a home run. And to be honest, some of the tracks that I felt that way after I finished them, where I was just like, I don't know about this one, ended up doing really well. You never know. So,
yeah, I think this is something that we all probably struggled with at some point in what we're doing, especially at the beginning. I used to create 1,000 ideas and never finish any of them. Mm-hmm. I think what made me learn how to complete projects was mainly becoming a project producer for hire, where I had to finish it for the client there, because if not, they'd bother me, and they still do. They'll still like email, hey, where's that track? Haven't heard anything about this. And so. Right. I think that's one way to get used to it. Or if you have a brief and something's due by tonight and the deadline is, whatever o'clock, and you got to have it done and submitted. So that's a great way to focus on completion, is have briefs that have deadlines, and then you have to get it done. And it's a great way to force you to get it done. The other thing for me, and I'm looking at a list on my computer right now of 14 songs that have whatever else they need in them, and that's what this weekend's going to be about. It's going from one song to how many I get through. I don't know. It depends on how many I actually sit down. If I sit down to finish one, it might take, most of my time or the weekend to go.
So you have like a checklist for the tracks that you're working on, then you kind of and you're kind of taking things off visually. I think that could be really helpful too. I don't do that, but that's cool.
I keep everything in a list, and I'll have like the song name, and then in the parentheses following it, I have what needs to happen. Okay. And sometimes after the song name, like if I'm working on a song for a project, then I'll have the song name, and then in parentheses I'll say drums, bass, keys, whatever I think it needs that I haven't done yet, or this kind of sounds or whatever. And vocals, whatever. And then sometimes I'll even get into who actually is going to play them. And then I do a lot of times keep that knowledge for the track, who played on it, just so that in case I have to do album credits, I'll remember who played all the instruments on those things. But most of the time, it's just the stuff in parentheses is stuff still left to do, mm-hmm. and that just goes on my to-do list to do. And so this weekend I have a lot of to-dos, and so getting back to a lot of songs I started a month ago, or 2 months ago, or last week, or whatever, and finishing them out and completing them, getting them closer to production. For me, it's a little bit more like an assembly line, where I have a bunch of songs lined up, and some of them will get finished sooner than others. Some of them are a little bit more, a lot more. Like I have one right now that's kind of like a classical piece. I don't even know if it's a piece for any kind of use for licensing, but it certainly is something I might want to put out on my composer channel or something like that, or make sheet music to sell to certain kinds of ensembles. Completing that means not only finishing it as far as the sounds, but sending it to someone who's going to do the sheet music and all that kind of stuff, because I'm probably not going to do that myself. And so there's a lot of different areas of completion depending on what type of song it is. Mm-hmm. But usually it's just a mix and an instrumental or whatever that you can send to licensing places, libraries, whatever you're doing it for. But again, I work on more of an assembly line type of way than just one song. And I'm only focused on that one. I don't know if I could do that. I have to be focusing on multiple things at a time. But certain times, there are songs in my head that I just have to get out, and I just have to finish it because I want everybody to hear it, or I want to get it into the library or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, absolutely. This is something that it took me a long time to get good at, is actually completing, 75% of what I made versus only 25% or less.
Yeah, and just thinking, somebody brought this particular thing up in the academy the other day. Is one of the things that they felt they were really struggling with, that was slowing them down, was just like obsession about sound selection, and I kind of resonated with that too, because like I have, for me personally, like I just have such a massive collection of sample libraries, samples from Splice. It's just endless, some of which I haven't even really totally dived into yet. And when you have so much to choose from, I think what can happen, there's a danger of like paralysis of decision making when you have so many options to choose from. And you can get into the zone where you're constantly searching for the perfect patch or the perfect sample or the perfect kick, and you really have to draw the line between, endless digging and actually getting things done. And I think that this is something I used to suffer from as well. Just spending way too much time on crafting or like trying to find the right samples. These days, what I do is I'll just stop when something sounds good enough. And so if it sounds good enough, use it, and then come back to the fundamental process, which is just getting the track done. Do the work of composing first and foremost in your process, and then you can come back to sound selection issues post composition. But you're certainly not. You're going to be creating a lot of resistance for yourself if you're just obsessing about trying to find this. Yeah.
That can be a little indulgent. I mean, this is going to fly in the face of our next point, but I think it can be a little indulgent to just sit there and try to find the right kick drum or the snare drum or the right pad. How many times have you been looking for the right pad? You end up using a pad you've used 1,000 times before. You know why? Because that pad works. This is like back in the day when I'd get a new keyboard, I'd go through all the sounds, and I'd spend the first few days with that keyboard just going through the sounds. I didn't even try to write anything or compose anything or record anything. All I did was just see what that thing did, and we'll talk about that in the next thing. There is a time for that, but not when you're trying to produce something. Producing is not the time to experiment in trying to get. If you're trying to get stuff completed, then complete it. But if you're trying to make art, then that's a whole different thing, and we can kind of talk about that in the next point.
Exactly. That's such a good point. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's a matter of kind of dividing up the time into like, okay, yeah, what's the goal here? Is it to complete, or is it to experiment? And that's our next point, which is just to maybe carve out a slice of time for yourself to experiment and innovate. Because I think, getting stuck in sort of a rut, a creative rut, is obviously a very common thing. I think it's especially so for producers who are working in a single genre. I don't know if a lot of folks out there are just kind of doing one single genre or experimenting with a lot of different ones. But I think to avoid getting in those ruts, try shaking up your workflow. This could mean, for me, it meant trying different genres, and getting out of my comfort zone. And doing things like, when I first tried to make a trailer track, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but it really, like, over time, it kind of expanded my knowledge on a lot of other things that benefited other genres too. So this could also mean just trying it like a new instrument or a different library that you've never tried before. I just think that adopting a sort of like beginner's mindset, it can really help sort of unlock some new creative insights into the production process. And I think that we all kind of tend to get stuck in these routines. But every now and then I'll just do something totally different, just for the sake of it. to stoke my own creativity. And usually the result is not good, at least initially. And it could be anything. It could be like starting with a drum pattern rather than a chord progression. You know what I mean? Just like flipping the script on your routine every now and then is really going to help you. And I think that, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I literally have a note up on right now called experimental methods, which I'm going to be implementing over the next couple weeks. I have found that sometimes I have to just get back to things that aren't my usual way of creating. I have to attack it from a different direction, come at it from a different place. And so I've got on this list modes, using different, a lot of this stuff is a bit theory based, but some musical modes like Dorian or just different ones that I could move to, and just you hear these different kind of chords happening with that than I would usually create. 12-tone or serial music where you're creating a bunch of tones that you do in a row, and when I say in a row, you do them one after the other. You just mix it. It's like, and I've done this literally. I've rolled dice to determine a melody line or a chord structure or a
Melody
tempo
roulette.
or anything. I did it for a piece and during my masters, and it came out really cool. But I never ever would have come at that song in the same way or made that song had I not chosen those particular tones out of just at random.
Okay.
And it made me think in a different way than I would ever normally think writing. I thought about just taking a bunch of chords and putting them randomly together and then building something out of that. I was in our mastermind. One of the composers did something with his phone number. He took the numbers of his phone number and
Nice.
made those into chords. And so a lot of ideas like that where you are experimenting with different ways. And I am totally right there, right this second. I'm going to be at the piano this weekend, really just trying some unique, different things to if nothing else, just to get myself out of some of the ruts that I've gotten in, doing a country album and doing a percussion album, which were very much, you have to do this, and this to get the sound that you're looking for that. And coming at some things a little bit more experimentally, and it literally says experimental methods. And so I am all about this right now. And I think this is more on the you're talking more on the production side. I'm talking about a little bit more on the compositional side. But on the production side, it could be as easy as working with another player or person you've never worked with before, rather than just doing it all yourself, which we tend to do in our little caves, and here working on our little computers. But or maybe instead of playing guitar, which you always play, try something on the keyboard. Try developing a melody in your head with no instrument. I think a lot of us sit down and we put our hands down in the same old places, and the same chords happen and our same melodies happen. Try to write a melody on your phone. Think of production sounds that you don't normally get and try to go for that. So I'm a big fan of this. Absolutely.
Try to incorporate vocals into your tracks. That's something that we talked about a couple episodes ago, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think another topic I'd like to discuss is kind of carving out your own distinctive sound, which comes down to consistency. I think consistency it's key to any industry. Music production's no exception. The best producers are known for having a kind of distinctive sound, right? And the ability to kind of reproduce results. So I think that, we're talking about, we were just talking about carving out some time to be experimental. But take notes, man. Take notes of what you come up with in those experiments. And if you have presets, if you have samples, or if you come up with techniques that work well, don't be afraid to use them over and over again. Over time, those go-to methods are going to form your signature producer palette. And dude, I reuse the same samples and the same kicks and the same snares over and over again. It doesn't make my songs all sound the same. It's just I have this growing sort of collection and this list of sounds that I just know are going to work for certain things. And I'm just, sometimes I just log it mentally. Other times I write it down. But these are techniques that have really helped me kind of create, like a cohesion across, like, say, like, a few tracks for an album. Do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I tend to, as you can tell, being a creative, I tend to continue to go back to creative type ways to make stuff. I used to have a template that had piano, and then it had the loops that I usually use, and then it had the loop package that I usually use, and then it had a drum setup, and then it had a bass setup. Mm-hmm. But I found that I was just doing the same thing. I was a little too consistent. I was a little rutty. It sounded like I was in a rut because everything kind of started feeling the same. So I have gotten away from. I do have a consistent template. It's called one empty software track and one empty audio track. That's my template, and I bring that up, and then I go choose the things. Now, again, you can't experiment too much with every song. You don't have that much time, especially when you're like me and you're doing a lot of songs at once. I might start with something that is going to work, but at the same time, I think consistency, when I'm thinking about music production, I'm thinking about how often I'm going to work and consistently work at it. I think one of the problems with music is everybody thinks, oh, it's this cool thing I can do anytime I want to because, who cares? But I think you've got to build a consistent time, especially if you're listening to this podcast and you have a day job and you are driving to work and it's just a slog, but and you get an hour a day free to do music or a couple hours a week to do music. You have to be more consistent than anybody. You have to make that time and that time you get to make music count. And so the consistency comes in to making sure you protect that time, and that time is with you every week. If it's a daily thing for you and you're able to carve out the mornings or carve out the nights, whatever you carve out, be consistent, get in there and do the work and do all these things, all your experimenting, all your completions, all your learning your DAW, all that kind of stuff. You just have to do, and you have to not just come back to it every blue moon, and you're not going to get anything done that way.
Oh, totally. And I was going to bring this up. I mean, consistency is not just about creating, consistency of like with a sound palette necessarily. It's about consistency of like creating an actual schedule for work, doing it, daily if you can. If you can't, then as often as possible. And like you said, protect that time at all costs and work around it. I mean, can we get the self-driving car things, going here, because then we could actually like do some production work in the car while it drives us to work.
Food feeding, and it could just and like get the toilet studio chairs, just so we can really get some things out of the way.
Wasn't that like a thing in like Silicon Valley where like all these programmers were drinking that Soylent stuff because they didn't have time to eat? They just like, anyway, carve out that space and time to work on a regular basis, and everyone's at a different spot with how much free time they have, but I think it's worth trying to schedule something.
It's hard enough for those of us who have time based on music.
Yeah,
in other words, Steve's whole day is based in that. My whole day is not necessarily weekdays based in that, but my mornings are, from the time I get up till the time I have to leave in the afternoon to go over and teach. I am here working on stuff, and if I don't show up, no work's going to get done. Nothing's going to get completed. There's going to be no breaks to take. If all I do is take a break and go to Disney for the day, nothing's going to get done. And so I have to be as consistent as anybody in order to get all these things done, or nothing will get done. So.
Yeah, for sure. Next point I want to bring up is simplicity. We got to keep it simple. I really think that the simple solution is often the best in music production. I think in many cases, listeners won't be able to tell the difference between a hard one and an easy solution. As a producer, I think it's and this is something that we were touching on earlier, but it's really important to develop an intuition and know when something is just good enough. and not overcomplicate the process. And I mean, I'll tell you what, like my process these days is like throwing a lot of things against the wall in a very short period of time when I'm coming up with ideas. But I absolutely, every single time I do that, I'm stripping away probably like somewhere up to like 50% of it. And at the end of the day, the simplest solution is the most effective. And sometimes I think I get into this mentality where I feel as though I have to plug all of these holes with sound. And I mean, a lot of the tracks that I review for feedback in the Academy suffer from this issue where just like there's too many ideas competing at the same time. And I'm often telling people just like, you know, get rid of that thing, get rid of that, simplify this, man, you know, and have one thing to focus on in this production, you know, whether that's your top line melody or if it's a vocal, just build the track around one simple idea. You don't have to just pack the production, your track with like tons of sounds and samples and ideas and melodies. It's just, you know, simple as it works. It just works.
Keep everything simple. Think about the rhythm section that you're making. I don't care if it's electronic or acoustic, but you have a beat, you have a bass, you have a chord maker, and you have a melody. I mean, there's not a lot more than you don't. I mean, not that every song is going to be 4 tracks, but you know, any band that you go hear has a drummer and they have a bass player and they have a guitar player and they have a keyboard player. They don't have 20 keyboard players. They don't have 20 guitar players. They only have one, and it's important. Just like drums, you know, people go too crazy on drums. A drummer can only play certain kinds of beats. He only has 2 hands and 2 feet.
Totally.
He can't do 8 things at a time, and so you've got to think in terms of what real people can do. And if you're not using real instruments, still think in terms of, do I have enough bass? Do I need 3 different synth basses that are all doing different things? Do I need all these loops going on? Sometimes I think you do Nepal loops together, but you know, don't feel the need to play 14 guitar parts, because almost on no recording have I ever done that in real life with 14 different guitar parts. Maybe 5 or 6 or 7, but rarely is there going to be 14 things going on. Not everything needs a string orchestra on top of it, or horns, all these things.
I used to think that, like, you know, recording the same part on my acoustic guitar is, you know, 6 times, like it's, and then layering it is going to make it sound really big. It doesn't. It just makes it sound messy. You know, just focus on getting like one layer really to sound really, really beautiful, and that's the way to approach it.
Yeah, if you're producing jazz, you just need a drummer, upright, and a piano. You could do as simply as trio. If you're producing piano music, it's just one piano playing. If you're producing rock music, it's just bass, drums, guitars, and vocals. It's not, you know, keep it simple. Do not overcomplicate what has worked for 100 years.
Yes,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Next point I want to touch on is focusing on your abilities, your strengths, and what you already have around you. I think it's really easy to get discouraged by focusing on the things that you don't have, and instead of what you do, instead of what's just around you and what you're already good at. Try to reframe, you know, your mindset and discover new possibilities with the things that you already have around you, and ask yourself, what are your strengths, and use that as a springboard. You know, especially if you're new to, you know, relatively new to production, or writing sync music, you know, and don't have a lot of experience in lots of different genres. I think, you know, when I first started out, I was just doing acoustic tracks, you know, like, 'cause that was easy. I remember I was like, those are the first tracks I think I uploaded to Audio Jungle. And that was back when I was watching, you know, a lot of Daniel Carrizales' videos, and that's what he was doing, just like these really, really simple acoustic tracks. And I was like, I could do that. I can play guitar. I can come up with these ideas. And everything grew from that, you know. Once I was confident about making like a simple, like Dan Barracuda style, like, guitar track that was just like two guitars, and maybe a little bit of percussion, then I felt I could kind of use that as a springboard to research new genres and get better with production, and just, it grew from that, so I think that was that's a good example of just kind of focusing in on my strengths rather than getting too in my head about like trying to create like an orchestral trailer track,
or getting depressed because you're not like someone else who can naturally do this one thing.
Yeah.
There's this guy on Motion Array. He's also on Artlist, and he makes this kind of music that they love, and he makes all this money at it. Oh wait, it's you. And but there are times where I'm like, should I go down that road and try to make income that way? And I think sometimes we get all we get messed up thinking, should I do that because this guy's doing it, or this person's making this much doing this, or this person's making that kind of music, I wish I could make that. It's not about you have to focus on what you do well and go after that, and or if you don't do anything well, figure out what you want to do well at and focus on it. But I am a piano player. I am a jazzy kind of guy. I like a lot of weird genres, and I like messing around in them, and it's kind of a video I kind of have planned. Like, there's a reason why I don't make more, is because I don't make stuff that makes more on kind of purpose, because I just do what I like to do, and that's my personal mantra. But it's not everybody's. But still, you have something that you can do better than the next guy. It might be guitar playing, it might be piano playing, it might be programming, it might be whatever, vocals, it could be lots of different things. The people who have made the most in their lives that I've seen in the music industry are those people who specialize in that one thing that they do. They're a guitar player. They're wanted on every session. They can create parts really fast and really good, and everybody wants that guy in their session. The keyboard player, or the orchestrator, or the drummer. We don't hire. I mean, there's a lot of musicians that play other instruments in Nashville that could physically play the drums, but we don't hire them because they're not drummers. They are guitar players who could also play the drums. We hire 30-year veteran or 20-year veteran drummers who have been through the test of time and played in every situation. So you need to focus on what makes you great, because that is what you're going to do the best. And Dan Barracuda is a great example of that, who just focuses on his guitar abilities. He's not all the time trying to create these huge big productions, because he loves doing what he loves, which is a certain kind of style, and focuses on those things. And I think we see that in his success. And so focus on your abilities for sure.
Yeah. And also, I try not to convince yourself that like getting the next, expensive sample library is gonna like help you create amazing tracks just overnight. I mean, like, because we're all suckers. At least I am a sucker for good marketing. We see these advertisements.
You really are, because they say they just got you last week.
Spitfire got me last week with the Albion Colossus library, but the difference is I knew I could do something really interesting with it. But there was a time when I gave Spitfire a lot of money, and then I had the library, and I was like, I don't really know what to do. And I just spent $500. But look, like the point I'm trying to make here is you try not to fall into that trap, because like, look, our friend Alex, for example, Alex B, he only uses stock Logic stuff.
Yeah.
And he's making thousands of dollars on Motion Array now.
Yeah.
He's got he had two number one
he also
downloaded
plays guitars,
tracks
though,
in
right?
there. He plays a bit of guitar. Yes, that's true. But he just like is not down with spending all this money on sample libraries. He's like, you know what? Logic's got everything I need. It's got the drummers, got the synths, and it's pretty damn good.
I tell everybody that when they start saying, "Oh, I can get other samples," I'm like, "Why don't you explore what Logic or / GarageBand has already? Because you're not exploring it. Logic by itself, I will do a lot of things at school when the students are working on MIDI things. I'll start creating a little MIDI thing, and I bring it home with every intention of replacing all the sounds. And guess what? I probably only replace about 25% of the sounds.
He made me feel like embarrassed to not really know that much about the Logic stuff. I mean, like some of his tracks are so good. I'm like, really? You use Logic to make this? It's
Dude.
like kind of blew me away.
I remember one day I was at a session in Nashville, and the guy pulled up, pulled out. I said, "This needs some cello," and he pulled up a cello sound, and I was like, "Man, that is great. What library is that from?" He's like, "Logic." It's all in how you know how to play it. And
Yeah,
if you
it's
know
playing.
how a cello player plays and what range in that particular sample works,
Oh man, yeah.
it doesn't really matter where it's from.
And we're gonna come back to that in a minute with the mixing and the mastering. But one more point to bring up here is to start your process with a plan. I can't tell you how many times I used to just kind of like sit down in front of the screen and I had the blank page syndrome. I was like, what? I don't know. Like I'm supposed to do something right now. I don't know what it is. I'm waiting for inspiration to strike, waiting for divine intervention here. And I don't know what to do. Going with a plan, man. Like have a plan. Say today I'm going to tackle, I'm going to write a hip hop track. And okay, if that's the plan, what style are you going to write in? Or do you have a reference track? These are things that have to be, these are questions that need to be asked, I think, before you start your process. Otherwise, you're really kind of just like wandering in the dark.
You've heard me already talk about my notes several times. I think you have to have notes. I have a to-do list that is a mile long, but it has every song that I need to get done. I have everything I want to try to get to this weekend. It has videos I want to make. It has, jobs I need to get done. But even inside songs, when I'm going to work on, I decide, I'm going to do an album of this kind of music for this library. And one of the most fun parts of creating any library is planning it out from the beginning, is saying, okay, I'm going to create this percussion marching band type of library. And I want it all to have different kinds of elements, like some have mallets in them and some have loops in them and some have all these kind of cool things.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead and kind of plan that out with 10 different songs. I might even think of some names for the songs and stuff like that. And I'll have a plan as I'm going. And then when I get into it, I know where to start. I know what kind of thing. Now, some songs come just because you start messing around and you come up with it. But for the most part, I don't do a lot of messing around. I don't have time to mess around. I need to have a plan in place for an album. And if it's a bunch of songs that are public domain, I'll go ahead and plan all those songs out, which ones they are. I just did a Christmas album in December, and I had a list of these public domain Christmas songs that I was wanting to rework and do in different arrangements. And I went through the list. I didn't just like sit down and go, what will I work on today? I went to my list and said, okay, which one's next and which one am I want to do the most? So yeah, man, you got to have a plan for what kind of songs you're going to do and how you're going to create them. When I sit down with an artist, we talk about when are we going to track? Who are we going to use to track with us? Who are we going to use for the engineering part?
Yeah.
Where are we going to do the vocals? Where are we going to... All that stuff is pretty much decided long before we do any of this stuff, because we got to have a plan or you won't get anything done. It's a little like being consistent with your time. You also have to plan out that time. And just because you have time doesn't mean that you will, get it done right then. You gotta really go after it. And have a plan.
It sounds kind of obvious, right? But it's something that's it gets missed. It gets overlooked. And yeah, like I said, I used to kind of just like I'd have it on my list of things to do for the day. Okay, today I'm going to work on music from like 10 to 1, and then I'd sit down and be like, oh wait, really didn't plan this out. Like I didn't have any game plan. I didn't take any notes. I didn't do any research. I didn't have any kind of specific notes made about it. And like I would just kind of twiddle my thumbs and be like, well, I kind of don't really know what to do today. So
yeah, definitely game plan that time out. Not just make a consistent time, but plan in your head before you even get there what you're going to do. I have my weekend planned. I know the things that I've got to get done, and especially the things that are on top of the list.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to get to as many as I can because I have a plan of which songs to attack first. And you might think, hey, who cares about my songs? Who cares about my list? Well, nobody necessarily, but you need to, because you're the only one who's going to get this done. If you don't get it done, nobody's going to get it done. And so when you have that time planned out, then you need to make sure you're planning what you're going to work on. Now, if you're only working on one song at a time, you pretty much know what you're going to work on. But If you're playing more than that, start making lists, my friends. Lists
Yes.
will be the savior of your life, because you'll be like, okay, I knew I wanted to do some things today. What was it? I keep that text list. I use what's it called? It's just the notes program in Mac.
I use the notes
Also, I
program
used
all
to
the
use
time.
Evernote. Evernote was what I used before this, but Notes is free, so I can use that across all Mac things. But get yourself some notes and keep them on a daily basis. So
100%. Yeah.
I used to do a lot of journaling, and now I just use the notes thing. So
I use notes every day. So last thing to talk about here, and it's the big kahuna, mixing and mastering. I think this is probably what causes the most issues. I think it's obviously a crucial aspect of production.
and it shouldn't.
It shouldn't. I don't think it should. So, and yet it's the source of many challenges for many producers. I think I really think that a common belief among music producers is that the mix on its own is what separates their tracks from the work of, like, say their idols, or what they're aspiring to sound like, and that the mastering is what makes a track sound, quote unquote, professional. I think it's worth noting that these skills are I think they're often overemphasized in importance, and maybe that's a hot take, but this is just my opinion. Because I think that the reality is that most of the time it's not the mix that's the problem, it's the arrangement. Mixing and mastering are, obviously closely intertwined with the whole creative process of music production. So producers tend to believe that, the mix is what needs fixing. They might think that adjusting, like, the balance or the EQ or the compression will solve the issues with their tracks. I really don't think that this is always the case. The real issues often lie in the underlying elements of the track, such as, choice of chord voicing, layering, arrangement, like I said, sound selection, melody sometimes. If these elements are not kind of carefully considered and executed, the end result is usually just kind of like a muddy, sometimes an uninteresting track, no matter how much EQ or compression is applied. So I don't want to downplay the importance of things like EQ and compression. And there, it's obviously mixing is a super important aspect of music production. I just don't think that they should not be overemphasized or relied upon to fix fundamental problems in a track. I think that people should really be focusing in on the core elements of the track and work to make sure that they're as polished and effective as possible, right? I just think that the problems are usually not what you think they are.
Here's my general take, and I think this is somewhat of a hot take, but it's really not. I mean, it's a little bit more common sense for me with mixing. And that is, especially for composers, if you are composing everything yourself, you're not using other players. Actually, it's the same. But let's say you're just composing this yourself and you're starting from scratch. You make a piano track, you make beats, you make drums, you make orchestral stuff, you add all this stuff in. To me, and I think this is pretty much accepted, and I think I hear Daniel talking about this, and I think we've talked about this before, you should be mixing as you're going. There really is not a time where I create something and then I go, okay, well, I've created this whole tune. Now I have to mix it. Oh my. Well, I don't, because it's pretty much mixed by the time I get done with it. Guess what? Something too loud while you're making it, turn it down. I mean, don't think towards the mix like, I'll do that later. Oh, I'll turn down these drums that are super loud later. How can you work like that? Mix them in now. Mix that bass after you put the drums down. You put bass on. Mix that bass in. What are you waiting for? It's only adding more work for yourself. We've already determined that there's not enough time to do this in the week. And then when you do, you may or may not have a plan to get it done. Don't make more work for yourself by not mixing as you go. It's like fundamental. It's like doing any task, work on it as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most that I do because I do work, I do the same thing. I work on it as I go. I basically am just doing volume adjusting, making sure that things are balanced, and like usually just a bit of EQ before I get to the actual final mix process. People are shocked by how little processing there is on my final mix. Like I really don't do much to it at all.
It's because most of the sounds we're going to use are already adjusted for us. They're already EQ'd. They're already compressed. They're already at the volume they should be at, and they're already well made. A lot of these samples that we're using, they're all orchestrated and all fixed up and compressed and ready to go. They're not needing a lot of... I just did a mixing last week in Pro Tools, and I've got students, I'll explain compression to them, and they'll put compression on every track and pull the threshold all the way down till there's almost no sound coming out of the whatever they're compressing, because they don't understand compression yet. So, I'm just saying, I try to teach them that it's just kind of a light thing to use lightly, but they are just compressing the heck out of every single track and then wondering why it sounds like an AM radio coming out of a little speaker. And I'm like, well, it's because and you don't need to do that. Especially with the sounds that you are using from Logic is ready to go. We went over Logic last night and I said, when you import a sound, it's going to go ahead and put all these effects on it because it knows what it needs to be and it knows how it needs to sit in the track. So there is not a lot of automating you're going to need to do for your Logic tracks because all those sounds are meant to go together. And a lot of your samples, I mean, there's some general mixing that you have to do as you go along. And you might need to add brighten up a track with some EQ or get rid of some low end with a certain thing so that stuff doesn't interfere with each other in your mix. But again, I feel like that's stuff that I do as I go, rather than waiting until the end and saying, oh, that piano has too much low end in it, I'm going to take some out. Well, I probably will have done that already.
Yeah, totally. And I hope this doesn't come across like I'm downplaying the importance of understanding how compression works and learning how to use an EQ properly and stuff. Also, on a side note, I think it's perfectly fine to be that guy who's going to just mess with compression and play and pump it to the max just so you know how not to use it. You know what I mean? You should be extreme with the plugins just so you can get a really good sense of how they sound. But I mean, I do a lot of micro adjustments on my way to the finish line. And by the time that I do a final mix, it's usually just a bit of compression on the stereo out and a mastering plugin like my Ozone, right? It's very, very, very little. So people often ask me about the bass lines I do for the lo-fi tracks. What plugins did you put on the bass line? I'm like, none, man. That's just direct in to my bass into my Apollo and sometimes a little bit of my Pro C compression, and a tiny bit of compression. That's it. Yeah. It's all about the stuff that's going in, make sure that your sound selection game is somewhat on point, be careful about the sounds that are going in, do a little carving on the way, do a little volume adjusting, and then you don't have to do much at the end of the day.
As far as mastering, because we could talk about mixing for a whole episode, really. We're just kind of hitting the quick version of it here, and mastering will do the same thing. Mastering is only the process of finalizing the mix. You're not. A lot of people mix up mixing and mastering. They think mastering is another mixing process, and it's not. Mastering is really not even a process that is that crazy, especially when you're doing singles where you're just trying to prepare one song to release. It's just about making sure the volume is right, making sure the it's got somewhat proper limiting on it so it doesn't get too loud. And again, if your mix is good, we mix in this class with no limiter on the master. They have to learn how to mix without going into the red on their master on either program with no limiting on their master channel. So that means they have to use proper compression, proper volumes, because we still have to have a certain level of volume in that master track. So what I'm talking about when we get into mastering is a lot of times we are doing some kind of limiting on the master channel, just some kind of light limiting to keep it from going into the red. And also I do a little bit of EQ band compressing, I think, with one of my I have 2 Waves plugins, but you could also use Ozone or Ozone Elements and just get a quick master almost by preset that it listens and gives you a pretty decent mastering. I just was telling one of my people in the mastermind about it because she was wondering, how do I master my tracks? I don't understand mastering. I'm like, well, the beauty is with some of the tools out there, you don't really have to,
They make it really
if
easy.
the mix is good. Yeah.
Yeah, they make it really easy. I'm a preset guy. I usually scroll through Ozone presets and then make adjustments from there. Yeah, and I mean I don't work with the Ozone on the track. I make things sound really, really good before I apply the limiter and make sure that there's enough headroom. Yeah, so I think that's smart, teaching people to work without the limiter and taking care of some simple gain management issues.
It's just gain. We call it gain staging, where we're just trying to build gain up through the mix, and then you have to go and control the trouble spots like kick or snare or vocals with gain. But that can all be done. I'm seeing it done by beginners, in this class, and so I kind of love. For a while, we were letting them use limiters on the master track, but now I'm not, and it's teaching them to be smarter with their gain, with their volumes.
Yeah.
So, but mastering is usually done on the master track, and it's usually some kind of form of compression or light limiting or something like that. I'm not a fan of really compressing and EQing to death the master track. If you're having to do that, then you didn't do a good job either recording the instruments or choosing the instruments.
Well, I just don't like to think of either mixing or mastering as corrective.
Right.
I just want
we don't fix it in the mix.
Yeah, we don't fix it exactly. So, yeah, man, I think that's a good discussion overall. And those are, I mean, if anyone was picking my brain about like essential tips, those would be it. I'm sure there's other ones, but I think we covered a lot of ground.
Sure did. Well, thanks everybody, and hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next week for the podcast.
Absolutely. Hit us up in the comments, say hello, and we'll see you soon.
All right. See you.